I'm Maddie Mad Dog Forberg, and for those of you who don't know me, I am a strength coach and a 57-kilogram powerlifter on Team USA. I like that I can program into the RP Diet app what time I'll be training, and even if it's a light, heavy, moderate kind of session, and that will, differentiate the kind of macros that I'll need, and it can let me put in how long my training session is going to be. I use the RP Diet app during all seasons of powerlifting, whether I'm cutting weight, bulking up, or even right now, maintenance, keeping on the same weight that I am.
We're back again. RP Plus. Welcome back. Dr. James, Dr. Mike, answering questions. How are we doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. Can't complain. My movers still haven't fucking showed up, so I'm still pissed off about that. No. Yeah. And they just don't call me back. I called, it's like the guy I'm talking to is this Russian guy too. And he always gets real flustered. He's like, oh shit, it's you. You're the guy with the Montana, right? I'm like, yeah. He's like, those guys were supposed to call you. Fuck, shit. I'm going to call them and then call you back. And then I never hear from them.
Amazing. Listen, James, you don't get anything back anymore. Your stuff belong to us now.
That's how I feel. I just paid you to take my stuff away at this point. I'm never seeing it again.
You're going to have a Taken-style movie about getting your stuff back. It's currently in Eastern Europe, used in a whorehouse, for people to bang on. But say you're not there to rescue the prostitutes, you're there to rescue the couch.
Furniture, the beds and the couches and shit. God.
You know what? They should have never, ever stolen from you. That's where they
have a
made a
very
mistake.
Particular set of skills.
That's right. Needs analysis.
God.
All right. Ready?
Yeah, exactly. A very useless set of skills. Ready.
Okay. Adrian Denale says, hey, fellas, question regarding cardio. In your opinions, what is the most effective modality and what would you recommend for someone into bodybuilding? I always thought high-intensity interval training was the most beneficial. However, I've heard from either you guys or other pages that I follow that when fatigue becomes a factor, this may not be the case. Correct. Been really confused as to which one would be more beneficial. This is also under the assumption that diet is in check and cardio is for burning those few extra calories. I'm glad you said those few extra calories. That narrows down the answer. Also interested in when you prescribe specific types of cardio and to who and for reasons, i.e. why use high-intensity interval training versus less in specific situations for specific athletes. Is there much of a difference other than for specificity reasons? And finally, would you continue to perform cardio even if you are in a mass phase? I understand people like to maintain their conditioning, but I don't plan on running any marathons anytime soon. This is more of a, is there a point since I'm going to be gaining weight regardless question. So I'll give my answers, and then James can play cleanup for me as usual when I get everything wrong. So number one, the best kind of cardio for bodybuilding is just getting a step tracker on your watch, one of these, and just setting yourself a step goal that puts you into moderately or high active. Just make sure that doesn't fall off as you lose fat in your fat loss phase. Keep your steps up to a certain minimum level or a certain average. Mine's 12,000 steps a day. Anything between 10 and 15,000 is usually very good. And that will absolutely be, because then you can combine all the daily activities. Like, for example, you go to the store and you go shopping, it counts that. So if you had a particularly busy day, there's no reason for you to be doing extra cardio. And extra cardio then can be in the form of walks. One really cool time-saving strategy I like to do is if James and I are just talking on the phone, and we're not talking through webinars, I'll just plug in my headphones and I'll talk on my phone to James as I walk around the neighborhood or walk around my fucking house. And that's it. It's steps, and it's super, super awesome. You can modify that with putting on a weighted vest like James has done in the past, under the impression, both literature and through James and many others' feedback that works really, really well. Not mandatory, but part of the process that you can engage. If you're using a modality that's gym specific, I think something like the elliptical is probably close to optimal because it's list style elliptical, between 100 and 140 beats per minute, no higher than 140 beats per minute sustained heart rate, because anything higher is too high intensity will fatigue your legs and arms. Cool thing about the elliptical, why it's probably the best if I had to put my money on it. Now, mind you, there's tons of caveats and tons of individual variation and difference. The elliptical is non-impact, so it doesn't do any kind of impact stress, and it also lets you use your upper and lower body, all the major muscles thereof. So it just spreads the cardio around to the most stuff, allowing you to use all of your body's slower twitch fibers and none of the faster twitch fibers. No localized fatigue, just generalized fatigue, which is really, really good. So that's it. And then incline walking and treadmill walking and stuff like that is pretty cool too. Cycling is just fine, especially if you can get outdoors on a real bike, because cycling indoors is maybe worse than hell. High intensity interval training is suboptimal for bodybuilding because it's cardio SFR, and the stimulus in that case is calories burned ratio to the fatigue incurred is not that great. However, the STR, using concepts in our upcoming book at the end of the year from the hypertrophy book, the stimulus to time ratio of calories burned in a unit of time is amazing for high intensity interval training, probably the best. So to answer your question about who is high intensity interval training for, it is folks that don't have a lot of time but need to squash in the cardio, usually for health. Like if I have somebody I'm training who's like a 55-year-old international businessman or CEO, something like that, and he's like, look, I have basically 30 minutes every other day to train it all. It's going to be compound alternating supersets for lifting and high intensity interval training for cardio. And a lot of times those two are really kind of the same thing if you think about it. So that is the answer to most of those questions. Let's see if I missed anything. Mass phase. I like to keep active on a mass phase. And if you maybe, let's say, do 12,000 steps. So there's actually two potential ways you could do this. One is do more activity on your cutting phase than on your massing phase. That's totally fine, but you could just reduce food on your cutting phase. And because your activity doesn't fall, you're good to go. Another one is you just sort of keep the same amount and don't reduce food. You do reduce food and keep the same amount, or you can do more. But either way, whatever you choose, your massing should also have a certain number of steps tracked, and you should just keep active like that. If your steps per day are very low, and you'll say you drive to work, sitting down in an office, and then come back, then yeah, there's something to be said for you potentially threading in some cardio. I would say the cardio should just be there, in minimum amounts for health. Maybe 3 to 4 sessions of up to 30 minutes per week. No more than 140 beats per minute heart rate is the most I would do massing. Otherwise, if you really want to be healthy or not get super fat on massing, probably just don't eat as much. And thus, you have 2 problems solved. You don't have to stuff yourself anymore, and you don't have to do a ton of cardio. What I don't like to see is people take 50 cheat meals, tired of eating the food, and also do a ton of cardio. Yeah, it's a fun way to eat a lot and do a ton of physical activity. It's great for your health, but unfortunately with true massing that gets really, really tough, sometimes that eating is no longer fun. So don't be, people have been like, hey, I'm doing tons of cardio on my mass and I can't gain weight. I'm sick and tired of eating. I'm like, boy, oh boy, do you have the easiest solution in the world. Just do a little less cardio and all of a sudden things are going to be good. So that's my answer to all that. James, what do you think?
Yeah, that was really good. The middle question is the easiest one and has the greatest downstream effects on the other questions. So why use HIIT versus LIST? Is it a specificity issue? Of course, it's always a specificity issue. Bodybuilding is not a cardiovascular sport at all, right? So really you're not doing it for an actual cardiovascular enhancement outside of very, very minimal health benefits. You're just doing it as a glorified way to just get some time to burn some extra calories. So there's almost no incentive for bodybuilders to do high intensity interval training. The only people who need to do that are high intensity interval athletes. Really, that's what it boils down to. And that's just a specificity constraint at that point. So I agree with all those other things that Dr. Mike said. I would keep a very, very light to mild cardio quota during massing, just for health purposes, just for, like I said, very general cardiovascular benefits for health. The other thing is cardio is people adapt very quickly to cardio modalities, especially if you're using the same modality all the time, like walking or whatever. So there is a good incentive to actually do less cardio during your mass so that you stop becoming quite as efficient while you are not needing to be as efficient, so that when you actually start doing a lot of cardio, you're burning the actual energy that you want to burn. If you just keep a heavy dose of cardio all the time, you just end up getting really, really good at whatever that modality is, and then it starts to be less and less effective in terms of burning calories, which is what you're using it for. So that's the big constraint there.
All right, Clint M says...
Dr. Mike, real quick, do you have a ceiling fan on over you by chance?
Yes.
Would you mind turning it off? It's just making a very distracting sound.
No worries. Let me see if this fixes the problem. 1 second. And enjoy the view of my nuts.
Looks like we lost him. Where did he go?
Did that help?
It's still there.
Okay, I'll just mute myself when I'm not talking.
Did you turn it off or just turn it down?
There's 2 fans. One of them I need to stay alive.
Okay, gotcha.
All right, Clint M. Ready?
Ready.
Cool. Hello, docs. I'm the guy that asked about chest growth as an older person a few weeks back, and I wanted to say thank you for all the advice. 42 years old, 3 years of proper training, hit all muscle groups twice a week, went to 3 times a week for chest per your advice, and I've been noticing some changes. It's only been a few weeks, and I'm going to cut. So I know the results will get better when I'm massing. I won't ask about overlapping soreness. That horse is dead.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah. My questions are, number one, how much should I really worry about my window for gains due to my age? Well, the actual answer is you shouldn't worry about it at all, because worrying will solve the problem.
Exactly.
You just play the cards that you're dealt. But let's see what else you say. I played my hockey from 5 to 25 years old, but there wasn't a lot of weightlifting involved, so I've never been really muscular, but I was in good shape until injuries caused me to stop playing hockey. Things went very downhill after that, and I didn't start lifting until I was about 38. I've made great gains all over except chest, as mentioned. I'll keep lifting regardless of your answer because I enjoy it. But what do you guys think about the gains window due to age? I think given your circumstance, if I had to bet when you would peak in your total muscularity, I would say it is probably going to be around 50 years old for you because you're so relatively untrained and probably didn't suck at hockey, so you're not the world's worst athlete.
The other thing too is you have to differentiate the training age for the different activities. So you might have a really high hockey training age, but your weight training age is actually relatively low. So by those standards, you're some roughly in the intermediate kind of range just based on your age alone. So I mean, you got nothing to worry about. Just keep training.
Yeah,
and what that means is that you're still going to be riding a pretty steep curve on the gain train, right? You're not going to you don't have like 25 years of weight training experience like you do in hockey. They're two different activities and two different response systems. So all good.
Yeah. Next question, number 2. I've had some patellar/femoral tendon issues from squatting. I train at home, so only safety bar squat, external rotation limited permanently from shoulder surgeries. Front squat and Bulgarian split squat, and I'm going to rig up some kind of belt squat soon. I found a good squat university vid that has me Spanish squatting with a band, box squatting 10 to 12 range, and Bulgarian split squatting 10 to 12 range to help with the tendon issues. It's been 3 weeks of a 6-week meso, and the pain is nearly gone. So I will finish the meso this way, and I'm asking how should I return to squatting? High reps, low reps, slow reps, pause reps. What do you gents think? Please, God, don't say more Bulgarian split squats. I think you should return to squatting with lower reps, but not super heavy weight. It's not your primary exercise. Still use the other exercises as primary ones. Put squatting in as the last exercise in the leg sessions, and do slow, relatively low weight, full pause squats, slow eccentric, full pause squats. And then if that goes well, bump the squats up a little heavier, go higher rep. So something challenging in the 10-20 rep range, and do again, slow eccentric paused. If that feels great, take away the slow eccentric pause, and then eventually, several mesos later, you can come back to squatting heavy in the 5 to 10 rep range, and you'll probably be fine. But that's basically it. You want to go nice and slow at first, not challenging, then nice and slow, challenging, then challenging but no longer nice and slow, normal cadence, and then get all the way back into heavy. So that would be my advice.
I wouldn't actually go into a new squatting activity at all. I would continue doing what you're doing for at least 2 more mesos, and make sure that the pain-free stays that way. Because I tell you exactly what's going to happen. You're like, oh, great, I'm pain-free. After a few weeks, you're going to switch to high bar squatting, and that pain's going to come right back. So keep doing what you're doing for now until you have like 2 to 3 mesos pain-free consistently under your belt, and then consider swapping back to some other more challenging squat exercises. And then I would do exactly what Dr. Mike said. But my point is wait a little bit before you do that.
That's super great advice. People always want to jump back in, and that's really a bad idea in many cases.
Yeah, it's like if you're a crazy person and you're taking crazy person meds, and you're like, well, I don't feel crazy anymore. I won't take the meds, right? And then what happens? You go back to crazy town.
Yes, my childhood. P.S. About a year back, I had medial and lateral epicondylitis in both elbows and thought I was screwed. I tried everything I could to fix it. Then I saw a post of Mike's about VersaGrips he uses. I was at my wit's end. I remember I couldn't grab wet clothes from the washing machine. It hurt so bad. So I thought I'd give these VersaGrips a try, and have been getting better by the meso for the last year. Best invention ever. I agree.
They are.
Hey, new lifters, your deadlift will go up a lot faster than your grip, so use VersaGrips. Thanks, Doc. Thanks, Docs. Dude, honestly, VersaGrips, like I always say this on YouTube all the time when I recommend them. I guess we are on YouTube. I don't get paid a fucking dime. I came up to the VersaGrips reps at the Arnold, and I was like, hey, I have a big following. I would love to represent your brand for free. And they're like, we don't do brand reps. And I'm like, sweet. Anyway, you guys are the shit. Keep doing what you're doing. But I'm going to continue to recommend them because of the fucking shit. Versa Grips are a revolution. Weightlifting shoes, the weightlifting belt, and Versa Grips. I don't understand how people lift without that shit. Chalk for pushing movements. And in a much later place, but still honorable mention is like wrist wraps for heavy pressing movements. But like at least the first three of those is just like the people who train legs and they're like, oh, I don't know, I don't feel my quads. I'm like, get weightlifting shoes. People are like, man, like I want to squat heavier, but I feel like I'm not training my legs anymore. Put on a belt. And then for people who are like, my grip, anything to do with grip, anything at all, even if you don't think your grip is limiting, you buy Versa Grips, you're like, oh my God, I can do like 3 more pull down reps on every single fucking set. Turns out my lats were never in 3 RIR or less for pull downs ever, and I'm getting noob gains again. It's insane. Versa Grips are the fucking shit.
I've had like a funny scenario with the weightlifting shoes where I've had clients and I'll say like, make sure you use those weightlifting shoes, and they will, and then for whatever reason they will stop using them, and then I'll just come to know
crazy person pills.
Because yes, exactly. And they'll send me like a video of them squatting and I'm like, where's your lifters? And they're like, oh, I felt guilty about wearing them. I'm like, what? Put those fucking lifters back on. What are you doing?
Yeah, people say like, well, it's just a crutch. Motherfucker, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Like, you know, when a surgeon uses a robot to help him assist with surgery, like, that's a crutch, dog. You shouldn't be using that. Like, what? The goal of the surgery is to save your dumbass, not use a robot. The goal is to get you jacked in the gym. Look, if you want to train for life, go run around in the woods and fuck animals or something like that. You know what I'm saying? Good God.
Yeah, totally. I'm with you. Those inventions are there to help you. Embrace them.
Can you imagine seeing a guy that's super jacked at a club and your girl be like, oh man, he's got bigger arms than you. And you're like, yeah, but he probably uses like lifters and fucking Versa. Nobody cares. Nobody gives a shit.
No one cares. Yeah.
All right, here we go. Next one is from Jordan Sanyev. Says, hey docs, I hope you're all doing well. Number 1, last week you mentioned doing 2 exercises per muscle group per session. You would take into consideration the performance of the first exercise only as a sort of truer indication of progress. Okay, that makes sense. The second exercise performance will always be muddied by the local fatigue from the first one. Yes, and by the systemic fatigue of that session as well. But how then do I judge adding volume for the second exercise? When doing 2 movements per session, I will always compare performance for both and add sets as needed. If that means barely adding volume to the second one throughout the meso, or at least definitely adding less, so be it. In my mind, that exercise is second for a reason, lower priority. Okay, so that's good. But I'm always doing it pre-fatigue, so the net effect per set should be higher. But I will rate and complete performance of the first and second exercise and add volume where needed. Where am I going wrong here? You're going wrong by assessing the performance of the second exercise at all. You should not be doing that. The first exercise performance is the metric of where you are in relation to your MRV and are you past it or not. So that's the only, so if performance is up or it's not down at the very least, then you're good to go. You're good to add sets if the other indicators indicate it. What are the other indicators? So soreness, pump, and so on and so forth of how much work you're actually doing and are you getting an effective training stimulus. Those you can use for the second exercise, specifically things like mind-muscle connection. For example, if you do like 3, let's say you're up to 5 sets of incline press and then you do 2 sets of dumbbell flies after. On the 5th set of incline press, let's say last week you did 5 sets of incline press and 2 sets of dumbbell flies after. This next week, like overall, your performance and soreness, everything says add a set to that workout. Where are you going to add it? Well, you look at this, you're like, after the 4th set of incline press last week, I just want to fucking kill myself. Like, I don't want to do any more fucking sets of incline press. And my elbows kind of hurt. And by the 5th set, I don't even have my muscle connection to my chest. I swear to God, I just want to die, right? But you notice like 2 sets of flies, you're just getting going. You're like, man, I wish I could get a 3rd set because it feels so fucking good, right? Then clearly you add a 3rd set of flies. So that's actually our distinguishing logic there is you always treat the first exercise as the performance indicator, but you treat both exercises as where do we add sets to? And you add sets to whichever one seems to have the best SFRs if you would add another set. It's kind of like, it's almost exactly this, me and my food analogies here, but this analogy holds on the base analogical level here. You eat a bunch of, you get all you can eat buffet, you go get your first plate and you eat let's say you eat all the food, right? The next plate you come in, you add. What are you going to add? We're not going to get any more items that are shitty. You're like, the mashed potatoes was good, but it's not that good. I really want more mac and cheese. Like that's how you choose to add sets is where do you think the stimulus to fatigue ratio is going to be best? If you're getting gnarly fucking pumps and great mind muscle connection from flies, but incline has basically fucking petered out, don't add any more incline until you got up to another 5 sets of flies, and then you got to add something, and it's like, okay, what's the least worst thing I can add, James?
Yeah, and that becomes more of an issue when you're looking at like MEV to MAV progressions, where you say like, okay, I started with 2 and 2, and I know I got to go up. Do I add, if I have 2 or 3 sets that I'm adding this week, do I put them all in the first exercise or the second exercise, or split them up equally? It can be hard to figure out. And so usually what we'll say, like Dr. Mike already said, is pick the one that has the best SFR, generally speaking, kind of load that one up to the point of which you don't really, or to the point where you can't really add any more sets, which is usually around like 5 for most people, plus or minus. And then if you have any volume quota that you're still working to fill up, or you're using the set progression algorithm thing, then you can start filling up some of those other kind of ancillary exercises. And it doesn't have to be that way. We just think that's probably the most efficacious way to do it.
Remember, folks, use SFR the whole time. After 5, James and I have observed that after roughly 5, or we'd say 5 to 7 sets of the same exercise, further sets have a lower SFR potential than new exercises. Like if I'm doing 5 sets of bench press and I have a choice to do a 6th set of bench or 1 set of like weighted push-ups, I choose the weighted push-ups. Because after that, the bench is so fucking stale that it was just a no-go. Like the SFR there is dog shit. So SFR tends to, depending on how you calculate it, but the mind-muscle connection and the feel, which is a good correlate of SFR, tends to peak usually between 2 and 4 sets in for the exercise. Like when you do the first set of the exercise, it's probably not the best feeling set. Your performance will be the highest, but it's not going to feel the best. Second set feels pretty good. Third set usually feels fucking awesome. Fourth set usually feels either the best or second best after the third. Fifth set, man, that's when you start to feel like, I could just not be doing this anymore. And that doesn't mean the muscle's fucked up. You could still have plenty of muscular and systemic ability to do it. It's just, it's really starting to get stale. That's when it's usually time to change. Some people can do 5, 6, 7 sets of stuff. I haven't met anyone who, instead of doing 4 sets of squats, 4 leg presses, are like, I'll just do 8 sets of squats. Like, okay. And if that's really how you feel, hey, follow your heart, but it's just unlikely to be true.
Yeah, and that's another good point too when you're talking about like meso to meso progressions. If you find that your first movement for whatever exercise is, your MEV is now at like 5 or 6, where are you going to go from there at that point? So that's a good indicator that that movement is probably going stale or flat for you, and it might be worth thinking about another exercise swap at that point. If it's, I'm not saying that 5 can't be the MEV for a movement, but that's where I would start looking at that like, oh, you're starting at 5.
If it takes 5 sets, like to begin with, among other sets from other movements, to really get something going at the beginning of a meso, man, that movement probably sucks. Like that's why James uses leg extensions a lot, and why I almost never use leg extensions. Because for me, leg extensions, it takes like 4 or 5 sets to do anything. And so I almost never use it. But if it took 2 or 3 sets like it does for James to get a whole lot out of it, of course I would fucking use it.
Yeah, and that's like a classic one is like the one you just said. You have like an incline pressing number 1 and then like a fly number 2. And you're like, I keep adding incline pressing and it's like, now I'm up to 6 sets, but I do 2 sets of flies and I'm like completely obliterated. It's like, oh, okay, well, now next time, maybe that fly actually maybe could have been in the first slot. You seem like you're responding way better to the fly. You just didn't know because this is the first time you structured them that way. And that's fine. And then the next meso, you can kind of play with it a little bit if you need to.
100%. And Jordan's second question is, how bad would it be to totally exclude a certain rep range? 5 to 10 for traps don't do dick for me. They beat me up with a little show for it. High rep ranges are amazing. What is your advice? Ditch the 5 to 10 for like 6 months, then come back around to it. I cover all different rep ranges for all muscle groups, not right for Meso 1, of course, but this particular one has not been working for me for a while. As always, appreciate your help. Much joy to you, friends. Thank you, Jordan. So I would say that I don't really have a big problem at all abandoning a rep range, as long as you've given it due diligence and tried it with different exercises, specifically for very small isolation moves, ones with tiny amplitudes. The total time that tension is applied is so small, and sometimes in the 5 to 10 rep range, it's just not enough work to have it be a good set. So remember, people say like, anything under 5 reps is not enough mechanical work, not enough contraction time for your muscles to actually become, relatively sort of exhausted enough and really, really activate all the pathways that they need for hypertrophy. And that's quite true. But remember, your muscles also, they don't measure reps. They measure time. Like that chemical reactions occur in time. and also distances that the muscles get to articulate and move. So a lot of times for many muscles, the distance the muscle moves is actually the same. It's just how it's arranged on the joint or whether or not the joint articulation is different. So with something like traps, because it's just here, you can do a set of 5 to 10 in as long as it takes us to do a set of 1 or 2 in the squat. Like legit, like I can do a set of 5 to 10 and it takes me like 5 seconds for traps. How long does it take you to do a full 1 rep heavy squat? Like 5 seconds, right? Maybe two reps. But we say 2 reps in squatting is bad, but your quads are exposed to high tension for just as long as the traps are. So I'm a big fan of like calves, traps, forearms. Sets of 5 to 10 are fucking garbage because they just don't expose the muscles to tension for a significant amount of time. I say for those it's 10 plus, and oftentimes sets of 20 to 30 work excellently there. And it's not because it's a magic high rep thing. It's the same amount of total contraction time, just the amplitude is so small the reps don't take as much time.
Yeah, very good. And in the specific case of traps, where you would get the 5 to 10 training would be from your compound movements, like if you're doing some like bent over rows or something like that. Now, I said that, and then I'm going to also say some muscle groups just tend to respond a little bit better based on your anthropometry and just based on their position to different rep ranges. Like for me, doing heavy barbell rows, if I do 5 to 10, I just don't get a good thing going. I have to get up to like 10, above 10 for something to really be good. Could be just that particular muscle group, could be me, could be a variety of things. So I think it's perfectly okay to just say like, okay, well, I did some heavy work. The traps were like a contributing muscle group to maybe these rows that I was doing, and I did sets of 10 on that. That covers you on that. And then if you're doing direct trap work, like Mike said, some muscle groups just are easier to train in like the 20 plus range, and it just works a little bit better.
Boom. What's up next? Okay, Harrison Catone says, hi, doctors Mike and James. Just finished listening to Recovering from Training.
Nice.
James, did you audiobook that?
You know it.
Dude, that's awesome.
That was the first one we did.
That's awesome. Gotta say, Dr. James, you have a good voice for narrating books.
Oh, I wish I had the sunglasses emoji for myself. Thank you.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a great compliment. Anyway, I have a few questions regarding recovery and adaptation that don't recall being covered in the book. Would wearing static compression gear negatively impact adaptation during strength blocks? I'm assuming there is a difference between how the body adapts to hypertrophy training and how the body adapts to strength training, 10s versus 3s. Therefore, does the small hampering effect of the most supplemental recoveries like cold, heat, and compression have towards hypertrophy also hamper the adaptation process the body makes for maximal strength? If compression does not hinder adaptations for strength, would you recommend its use during a strength/peaking block? And is there any reason why you couldn't wear compression gear as you sleep?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So I think for strength and we'll just say strength and power purposes, the effect is probably less profound. There are still muscular recovery issues from doing that type of training, and I do think that it can and probably will be impactful. But because strength and power adaptations are so heavily based just in the nervous system, the performance decrement that you might incur from using them is probably much, much less. And again, at that point, it might just be more of a muscular issue, not really a truly like a strength issue. So I think it's probably okay. I would still be a little hesitant for people to just like always be in the ice bath or always have the compression stockings on all the time, just because they're like, oh, it's a strength block, it doesn't matter anymore. I'd be like, maybe not. But I think it's definitely a less impactful time to use it. And I think during like a peaking block or like kind of a in-season kind of block is probably the most appropriate time to use them, because you're really not making huge gains in fitness. You're really just elevating your preparedness. You already have fitness. You're just taking the fatigue down and letting that fitness come out, right? So in that case, it's probably a pretty good trade-off in terms of the performance benefit that you get and the long-term cost. So in that case, it's good. For hypertrophy, it's pretty clear at this point that using those things all the time is going to eke away at your gains a little bit. For strength, I don't think it's as big of a deal. It's definitely something that I would be cognizant of and cautious of with my athletes. Like, hey, don't be in the ice bath every day. Because here's the other thing, right? If you're doing the ice bath or the compression stockings every day, why are you doing that? Are you doing it because you think it's going to increase your performance? That will not happen. It does not increase performance at all, right? Are you doing it because you're so fucked up that you can't get to your other training sessions? Well, what's the problem there? The problem is that that's not going to fix it. You got to go back to the drawing board and look at your volume landmarks, look at your volumes, frequencies, and intensities. That's just a Band-Aid on a much bigger wound that you have to address. So, and then the last one I think was, can you just kind of set it and forget it if you're wearing the compression gear? Yeah, absolutely. That's the that's the best part about wearing the compression stockings, is that you don't have to really do anything. You just put them on. They passively work. When I would get, excuse me, a little froggy today. When I would get elbow tendonitis flare-ups, I would put them on like during the day, and I'd leave them on at bedtime, and it would help. It would definitely help. It would definitely be a noticeable difference. So yeah, you can just put them on while you sleep.
Very cool. Next question. Since heat negatively affects the adaptation process post-training, would a warm but not above 36 Celsius bath be a recommended method for relaxation?
So it's not necessarily that it, you could make a case that it actually enhances the adaptation process in some way. So it's not necessarily that it negatively affects the adaptation process post-training, but like the big issue there is managing things like edema and stuff like that. Now there are some, again, there's the typical recovery adaptation trade-off that you do make. In some cases, it's actually the heat does provide a kind of an anabolic effect, but the net effect ends up being like a slight loss, because with the heat, you get increases in blood flow, which is good for nutrient uptake and waste removal. So that's good, but not exclusively good, not exclusively bad kind of thing. The key with the heat, and this is covered in the recovery book, I can't remember the exact numbers, is that the heat has to penetrate deep enough into the muscle tissue. So the external temperature at the skin has to hit some threshold in order for it to sufficiently penetrate into the muscle and elicit that effect. So something like a warm bath may not have that same problem. And actually the warm bath might be very relaxing and might not come with the same problems of like blowing up edema and stuff like that. Not sure, but definitely it's a good idea from the perspective of relaxation. I would, the thing is, like, Mike, you can chime in here. How many people are going to take like a lukewarm bath versus a hot bath, right? If you're deliberately doing it for the purposes of relaxing, that would just be like, I don't know, it's just flicking your dick instead of masturbating. It's just one of those like weird
also might not be very
situations. Right. It's just, you're like, this sucks. Why don't I just take a nice hot bath? And that's what's really going to get me relaxed and feeling good. I just took when we had guests over for 4th of July, including Dr. Mike and Crystal, somebody had done something and I had to take like a fucking lukewarm shower. And I just remember thinking like how bad, because it's not like taking a cold shower where it's like, this sucks. It's just like a tease, right? You're like, this could be so much better, but it's not.
For sure. And I think, like you said, the hypertrophy interference would have to be from a very, very hot exposure. So a normal bath or hot tub that's relaxing is probably going to be net enhancing to muscle growth, especially if it lets you relax. But don't think it's magical. Like sometimes people do things like cold shit or whatever that doesn't relax them. It's annoying, and they think like it's going to help me heal, right? No, it's not going to help you do dick. Just relax is really number one. Like James and I, our secret recovery modality post training is to fucking grab a meal and sit down on a couch and eat it while watching your favorite TV show. Like there's nothing really beats that shit other than like a blowjob by a professional. But
yeah,
I've
deviated.
Human being, so.
Right. I've deviated my routine. So I'll work out I'll like wake up, pump up drink, fill out my like daily planner as the pump up drink is kicking in. Usually I also have to take a huge giant pump up drink shit. Then I'll go lift, come back, do my post workout meal. And then if the timing is good for the day, I try to do one of the practices on the Sam Harris Waking Up app. And that's been like a really nice routine, because it forces you to sit down and like be very calm and relaxed. So it's a good combo. So highly recommend.
Very cool. All right, next question from Harrison Catan. Finally, for sleep, is there any evidence that supplementing melatonin negatively affects the sleep adaptation process with melatonin? Negative effects the adaptation process. I'm going to just go ahead and say no on that one. James, correct me if I'm wrong.
No, it's not as far as I'm aware, and then not specifically like training related adaptations as far as I know.
It says with melatonin, I like how quickly I'm able to fall asleep with it. I usually find it easier to wake up and a more alert post-waking. However, I do find that it shortens the time in which I naturally sleep. For instance, I fell asleep at 9:30 p.m. Sunday and woke up naturally at 3:30 a.m. Monday morning. I then went back to bed until 6 a.m. Before supplementation, I usually sleep 8 hours or a little under without interruption. Do you have any tricks for staying asleep longer, apart from just the brute force of trying to form a habit of sleeping longer?
ZMA has been really good to me for that. Now, I've said that a couple times on the webinars. It's not for everybody. I take the normal dose is like taking 3 of the capsules. I take 1, and then once I fall asleep, I am out. Nothing's waking me up. And the downside of that is you usually wake up kind of groggy and you kind of have a slow start to the day, which is kind of a shitty way to start. But once you kind of get through that hump, then you feel very normal and refreshed. But that's been one that I don't like to pander the supplement stuff. It's just one that I've had good experience with, and I know other people have. If the issue is not so much falling asleep, but staying asleep, that's one it works great. And you'll have really vivid, crazy dreams. I had one I'm like batting 70% on the dreams. We're like 70% of the time they're fine. And then 30% of the time it's like a stressful or nightmare situation. And it's awful. So be advised. There is that. It's like having a bad dream that you can't wake up from. And it's very vivid. Yeah.
Last webinar, you mentioned that coming off creatine before a meet to hold less water would be a bad idea for powerlifting. Could you explain why? Because creatine makes you stronger and it changes your leverages if you lose a lot of body water. Is it simply you'd be lighter? Yes, that's also a problem. It's my understanding that creatine supplementation helps in restoring ATP levels and thereby allows you to train more overloading sets versus someone who's not supplementing. I don't see how in tapering process or in a meet that its benefits would be that useful. I'm not trying to be cocky, just inquisitive, of course. We never thought you were trying to be cocky. It would be fine if you were. I think creatine has a very slight effect on back-to-back rep performance, even in very short durations. So actually you have 3 squat attempts and 3 bench attempts and 3 deadlift attempts. Count warm-ups with that, and creatine can actually help you make sure that you get your absolute best out of the meet. Secondly, my bigger problem is the water in the muscle and the leverage problem. So if your muscles are more dehydrated from coming off of creatine, there's a short adaptive window there where I wouldn't want to push weights super heavy because it could lead to injury a little bit more likely. And also you're leveraged differently and you weigh differently, and all of a sudden the bar doesn't fit in your hands like it used to. Your squat creases don't fit like they used to. Bench setup isn't what it was. Deadlift setup isn't what it was, just by small millimeters that can affect it. So don't change anything coming into your meet unless...
That's the bigger issue. Yes. Don't change anything, right? That's the whole point. Is like you're going into your meet and everything should be like rock solid. I don't have to switch anything. I've done this tried and true, no problems, routine, habit. Why? Why do you want to change whatever it is that you're doing? That's just adding so much variation into the equation.
Another really good thing about creatine is it holds body water, but you can still drop body water as easily or even more easily if you do a water cut. And you can get it back more easily because the creatine's there ready to nab all the body water for you. So if you're like 3 pounds off, keep taking the creatine, keep being 3 pounds off, cut 3 pounds before the meet, weigh in, rebloat 3 pounds back, and you'll be full and strong and have all the advantages. Like creatine basically does everything your muscles do. It's like having more muscle. So don't get rid of your muscle. You need it for powerlifting.
Yeah, absolutely. And don't change shit while you're going into peaking. Everything should be lockstep at that point.
And he says, also, I watched Dr. James' RP Plus series on developing an annual plan. I really enjoyed it. I'm currently working on developing one now, and it definitely helps to see it all out in front of me. One change that I saw I needed to make was changing my plan of doing an 11-week mass meso to doing a 12-week one, trying to nicely fit 2 or 3 mesocycles into 11 weeks. Either made one meso too long for me to train without a dealer or too short for much overload, but 12 works perfectly for 3 4-week-long mesos. Thanks.
Awesome.
Harrison Keaton. James, what fucks up with that?
That looks like some Celtic shit right there, right?
I want to like act like Conor McGregor and do fisticuffs and punch someone in the face when I see a last name like that.
I almost looking at that. It almost makes me think of saying it like Satan.
It is
like Satan. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm.
Leprechaun.
That's funny.
Yeah,
I'm glad you enjoyed the videos, man. Oh, Leprechaun in the hood again.
All right. Zhao Chen Liu says, hi, Dr. Mike and Dr. James. I find that my muscles get much better pumps and more sore the next day when I use exercise and emphasize load at the various stretch positions such as RDLs and flies compared to leg curls or bench press. Hey, good news. Those have also been shown to cause more hypertrophy. Isn't that strange? Loading at the stretch position correlates with soreness and pumps. However, Dr. Mike has mentioned that one of the benefits of full range of motion is the stimulus for large portions of the muscle fibers than partial reps. I'm wondering if using exercise that emphasize stress in the contracted muscle position, such as cable crossovers and leg curls, will hit different fibers compared to exercise that put more emphasis on the stretch state, just RDLs and bench. They absolutely will, but only by a small margin. Most full contractions actually hit the entire, almost 90-some% of the motor units, but there will be some slight differences. Absolutely correct in that regard. For someone who does high rep training, sets of, that was the only question. So yes, James, any addenda?
And that's just, I agree with Dr. Mike, and that's just one of the side benefits of variation is just not only are you emphasizing different fibers, but different regions of force within other fibers. That's why having, I don't want to say a variety of exercises, but not just having like one or two exercises if you're an intermediate is probably a good idea, because those exercises are literally training the muscle in a different way. And what that effectively means for hypertrophy is training different fibers within the muscle and training different regions of force within the muscle. And something like your pec is like a big fucking muscle, right? That goes all the way up into your armpit and stuff. So you can imagine that there's going to be all sorts of different positions and fibers that are activated by those positions through different training methods. So that's a good reason to do it.
Yep, absolutely. Next question, for someone who does higher rep training, sets of 50 to 60, with addition of bodybuilding training sets 10 to 20, with a high volume, low intensity work such as bodyweight squats, push-ups hinder their hypertrophic growth significantly if they have the recovery on point or have been exposed to high rep work for many years. Yes, absolutely. That's you could spend. That's first of all, there's direct chemical pathway interference, and second of all, there's recovery you could have put towards the training that you're putting towards expenditure instead.
And that latter point would apply to anything else too. Like, it's the same idea. It's like, okay, well, could I do, like figure skating? Would that interfere with hypertrophy? Like, yes. What about baseball? Yes. What about, name it, you name it. If your goal is to be to get the most hypertrophy possible, anything that's not hypertrophy training will interfere in terms of the actual training stressors, MRV, stuff like that, or simply just opportunity cost, time spent doing something else or time not recovering from the training that you were already doing. So that one's kind of more of a universal thing.
Yeah. Everyone recommends using lordosis spine when deadlifting.
You know what? Everyone doesn't recommend that. Dr. Mike and I typically do, but most people seem to push back on that. I would say the majority of people seem to push back on that. Do you agree?
Yeah, most people recommend on average a neutral spine, and we tend to skew a little bit lordotic, and some other people a little bit more kyphotic. But let's see where this question goes. Do you think it could be beneficial in doing some rounded back deadlifts using very manageable loads, being very careful, sort of like flexion rows, but without the rowing part of using more lower back than mid back for injury prevention? I think the flexion rows can do all of that very well. I think changing your deadlift technique from one to the other is an interesting choice. I don't know what exactly the injury prevention benefits would be from that, unless you plan on getting way out of your technique on your normal weight deadlifts with a neutral spine. But if you get out of neutral spine with 500 pounds, not a whole lot of what you did work with 225 pounds is going to come in handy at that point, because the forces will be outrageous. So maybe it can a little bit, but I don't see a reason why you can't do something like that with flexion rows and various other things. But yeah, potentially round back deadlift can be fine. Not really to prevent injury, but just to strengthen your erector spinae muscles and to hypertrophy them. And I think that can absolutely be done with round back deadlifts, provided the weight is low. I prefer flexion rows because that actually involves, very, very dedicated and very more isolated exposure. Like that, essentially, if you do round back deadlifts, that's a lot of junk volume for your quads and glutes because they're basically not stressed at all and it's just your back. Why don't you just do flexion rows and get tons of lat activation too, or do 45-degree back raises with your hips behind the pad so that it's only your back flexing and curling, and then you just get erectors only. I wouldn't involve tons of other muscles that have nothing to do with anything, and can throw off your technique as well.
I agree on all counts. That's just a ton of junk volume, first of all, because now you're not getting stronger in the legs or in their back really at all compared to the loads that would cause you to get stronger. It's also unclear that it would be preventative of injuries in any way. So to me, that's just like a huge waste. It's just like a waste of an exercise. I am a little bit more conservative on the round back deadlifts. I would say I personally would not program that for someone. And if somebody said, James, what do you think about me doing this?
I wouldn't program it either.
I'd be like, no. Yeah, sorry. I'm not trying to say that you were either. I was just, I would just say no. Like I would give more of a flat no answer on that, just because it also is like reinforcing poor technical aspects of the lift. And it's just, it's harder to unlearn a bad habit than to just start with good habits and maintain good habits. So I don't see a big incentive to do that, doing, good technique controlled regular deadlifts and supplemental exercises like the modified 45-degree, the flexion rows, like Dr. Mike said, that would all seem fine. I just don't see an incentive to do that.
100%. Last question here for Zhao Chen. If concentric and eccentric muscle actions are superior for hypertrophy than isometric actions, wouldn't a flexion row be better for erector growth than deadlifts? Ignoring the fact that one uses much higher poundages for deadlifts than flexion rows, possibly result that the growth of isometric contractions of deadlift offer equal or greater growth to the eccentric concentric stimulus in the low poundage and flexion rows. I'm asking purely on the movement's standpoint. If flexion rows are superior, would it be detrimental to the lower back / spine / nerves? If I use flexion rows as the main staple exercise to target the lower back, targeting more of the lower back than the mid back. No, I think it's totally fine. Flexion rows are very safe. I think that stimulus to fatigue ratio, flexion rows beat deadlifts any day of the week for growing the erectors. From raw stimulus magnitude, like you intimated, it's probably about even, or deadlifts even win. That comes at a massive fucking fatigue cost. And if I was trying to bring up my erectors specifically, I would probably use a lot of flexion rowing. I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Yeah, it wouldn't be my first choice. I would usually opt for just kind of like the more of the basic compound stuff, but that doesn't mean that I would exclude it either. It just wouldn't be my first personal choice. If somebody was like, I want to get a big back, I'd be like, let's start with deadlifts, right? Like, especially like if they meant like their erectors. And then flexion rows could be a supplemental movement, 100%, no issue there.
For sure. All right, Steve Blair. Hey docs, after years of very slow progress due to being afraid to put on weight, I finally managed to commit to a bulk. Commit to the bulk.
Oh yeah.
I'm coming to the end, period. That would be funny, right? If you do enough bulking, you will come fastly. I'm coming to the end of my third straight hypertrophy meso and have put on about 4 kilograms in 15 weeks. What is that? Like 9 pounds? That's pretty good. After this week, I'll be deloading and then doing a 3-week resensitization meso at maintenance. I'm undecided what to do after it, though. One part of my brain say do a quick 4-week mini cut followed by another 3 meso bulking, while another saying that's your adipose phobia talking, ride the momentum and go straight back into bulking after resensitization. While a third part of my brain is saying don't listen to that stupid second part. You just don't want to diet. A quick mini cut won't harm momentum too much. I would actually side with number 3. James?
Same.
Excellent. I love it when we're like in Pacific Rim when they fucking gel.
God damn it, the Pacific Rim.
You shut the fuck up, James. I brought up James.
Dr. Mike.
Go. No, tell him.
No, we were just hanging out for 4th of July. I don't even remember why it came up. Dr. Mike was on he was like trying to make like a very prolific point, and then he was like, it's like, in Pacific Rim, and I was like, why are we talking about Pacific Rim? It was like a serious conversation, and then somehow Pacific Rim got put in there.
I know exactly. Now I remember what it was. It was crazy SJWs who like want COVID-19 to be the end of the world. They want it to be their struggle. They just like it defines like it's a warlike state that it defines meaning. Like there's good people and bad people. There's a clear enemy, and finally some fucking meaning in my life. That was referencing like Pacific Rim. It's like the monsters are coming. We have to build these walls. We have to mobilize, and it's like fuck all that shit. I wish the monsters just never came. Right. So in any case, it was a stupid point then. It's a stupid point now. Nonetheless, the Pacific Rim analogy holds quite well, I might add. So anyway, which by the way, the Pacific Rim is a monumentally stupid movie. And they're like...
Did they make a sequel too?
Yeah, dude. Fuck yeah. I saw the sequel too. They're like, it's a great plane movie, like I have to kill 3 hours, like done. So like the way they explained it is like, you got to like, the mech's like too much nervous system for you. It'll fucking fire brain if you try to fucking drive it alone. You got to mesh and use both brains. But this is the stupidest shit in the world. The mech moves like a fucking person. It actually moves less. There's less articulation at the joints. You can't do this with the mech. You can do that with your own fucking nerves. Who the fuck designed this thing? Fire that guy. And get a guy to build a mech that just translates normal human movement. Oh my God, it'd be the best thing in the world. Fuck out of here.
Fuck out of here.
But the Japanese crab monster, that was a fucking cool monster. I was scary as fuck. I love monsters.
I love the crab theme stuff. Yes.
Anything crab related and Japan related, good to go.
Yes.
So
we watched anime last night with Chris bugged out right away. He was like, "No, we're not doing this." But Doug and myself, and then Mel hung out for most of it. Yeah, it was good. Pro mare.
Doug's a champion. Doug never fucking bugs out. All right.
It was so funny. Sorry. We tried to watch it the other night, and I was like, Doug, you ready to watch the movie? And then Mel like jumped in, and she was like, let's not watch that. I was like, Doug and I really want to watch this movie. And she was like, let's watch exclusively what I want to watch. And we went back and forth, and we were like, fine, we give up. And then like later the next day, Doug was like, yo, James, you still want to watch that anime? I was like, yeah.
Yes.
we made a point to be like, we're watching it.
Yes, man cave anime watching.
Yes.
All right. Is it okay? You can probably tell I've been in lockdown for 3 months with no one but myself to talk to. Anyway, my question is, how much impact would a short mini cut actually have on bulking progress? Looking at myself in the mirror, I'm not desperate need of a cut, but if it's not going to do much harm, then mini cutting now means a shorter cut later or longer to keep bulking. Since I can't stop second guessing myself on the best course of action, I'd welcome any advice other than stop talking to yourself. Continue to talk to yourself. Do it under your breath, because if you do it in public out loud, it tends to throw people into some kind of discordance. Absolutely. Yeah, James and I think are both big fans of that option number 3, if you feel up for it.
Yeah, there's no real incentive not to do it either, because it won't interfere with your mass momentum. If anything, if there's are any negative effects, they're going to be washed out by the massive positive effect that you reap when you switch back to massing. So I don't really see a reason not to.
Just like use the same movements you did in the last mass,
yeah,
and just try to keep the performance on them the same. And then when you switch gears to massing, your performance on them is going to fucking start skyrocket again. And if it peters out, just switch movements. You're good to go.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Peyton Downs. Hello, gentlemen. My back is still sore from last back session, and I have SLDLs today. Is it going to impede my long-term back development if I do the SLDLs with a sore upper back? Once or twice, no. If it's a consistent thing, I would re-alter your plan, James.
And some things you can kind of get away with some movements, like for example, like if it's like your mid back, you might not have a huge problem, but like if it's your lats, holding the bar in position on the SLDL is really is surprisingly hard on the lats, and so that will have like a very tangible performance decrement on that particular movement. So I would say you might want to play with it, not play with it, but just monitor it, see how it goes. If your back soreness doesn't actually impede your performance, it might not be a huge deal at all. For myself, I know that like I cannot do pull-ups the day before SLDLs just because of that effect of the lats. So you will have your own unique, circumstances around that. So just monitor it and observe it for now, and go and see where it goes.
This is one of the reasons why James and I are not fans of altering frequency within a meso. It can be done, but it's tough, because then it's kind of like, well, I was doing everything and it was healing on time, and then I stuck SLDLs in here. Now it fucked everything in the ass. Like, I'm not healed enough to do SLDLs. I have to change my rows, and then after the SLDLs fuck me up for everything else, and blah 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 blah. So it goes down the drain.
Totally.
All right, I can't believe this question is being asked, because this is some shit I wanted to rant on for fucking forever. Here we go. Number 2.
Oh no.
James,
I just looked at it and I was like, oh, I can see where this is going.
It's great because your laugh was computer slowed into robot voice, which is even better.
Oh, perfect timing.
Yeah. Number 2, what are y'all's thoughts on the future of genetic engineering of unborn babies? Do y'all think it's ethical and good for mankind? So I will give you my very humble opinion. It's not only is it ethical and good for mankind, I could probably put together decent, though not bulletproof argument, that given that technology exists, it may be unethical to not use it. For the love of fucking God, it is just an extension of mankind's reach. It is just an extension of the ability to do better. When you get a vaccine, the vaccine fucks with your DNA. That's a good thing, God damn it. That's what you want. Like, nature has given us tons of really cool things, fucking eyes that work and a mouth that works. Like, hey, thanks, cheers to that. But it's given us a ton of shit that fucking sucks and you don't want, and we can do fucking better. So there's no distinction in my eyes between putting air conditioning in your house and putting different genes in your body to make yourself better. Like, can you fucking imagine if your kid comes out, with some kind of congenital disease, and he's like, hey, I guess life's, when he becomes of age at 10 years old, he's like, I guess life is tougher for me than other kids. Be like, well, you know what, Billy, we could have engineered that disease right out of you, but we chose to keep it in because that's fucking, that's God's plan. What the fuck? Like, that is nuts, right? Should genetic engineering be very, very well tested for it to be safe? Of course, but how many parents do you think would fucking even choose to do that unless it was vetted like crazy? It's going to be crazy vetted. That's my big problem, is I think the regulatory apparatus in modern economies or modern governments is going to have a real hard time accepting shit like that. So we'll go to China or fucking Vietnam to do that shit, or some crazy unregulated place. You better believe I'm going to fucking go there for my kids or grandkids or whatever the fuck. It's a fucking awesome thing. Of course, it's perilous, but I'll tell you that leaving shit to nature is way more fucking perilous than trying to slowly but surely and marginally improve things through genetic engineering. My second to last point is the most important thing you could possibly engineer is higher levels of intelligence. Higher levels of intelligence of human beings on average. Let's say we already know what the genetics are of people who have an IQ of 160, right? Top end of most scales, because those people are around. It's probably not that big of a mystery. If we peg everyone born after the year 2040 to 160 adult, Oh my fuck. Oh my God. We have a fucking world of Yale graduates. Everything gets fucking infinitely better. Do you know how many bad things happen because people are not sufficiently intelligent? Any policy problem, any disagreement you have politically with anyone, is probably 90% due to them just not being fucking smart enough to understand what the fuck is going on. So that, and then lastly, it's not clear which one will become more ascendant, genetic engineering of humans or the coming explosion of artificial intelligence and the synthesis of artificial intelligence and human intelligence to eventually upload human brains onto computers and then expand their architecture, so on and so forth. I personally think, if I had to guess, that the computer shit is going to come a little bit faster than the genetic shit. The genetic shit will really get going and the computer shit will come before, which is sweet. Fuck, let's skip genetics altogether, just go straight to robot bodies and crazy hyper intelligence. But yeah, as soon as genetic engineering of any kind comes along, I think it's fucking awesome to use it, and it allows you to, you don't like grocery stores, you don't like air conditioning, you don't take vaccines when they give them to you, you agree with us already. And if you don't like those things, sweet, enjoy an early fucking death after a shitty life, James.
I pretty much exclusively agree with Dr. Mike, though. So like some of the things seem obvious, right? Like the medical screening and stuff like that. Like we can remove genetic diseases and all these horrible things, you know, like Parkinson's disease or, you know, Alzheimer's and things, so that you never have to deal with that again. That seems like an obvious thing. I think where people find it unethical is the potential for like kind of how people get sensitive about things like wage gaps, where they say, okay, well, if it's privatized and it's not a government regulated thing, then you're just going to have people who can afford to get genetic modification. And then it's going to become like a weird class form of eugenics, more or less, because you have like a very small subset of the population who are getting infinitely better, and people who can't afford that service are going to just stay where they are. I don't buy into that. I can see why somebody might find that to be unethical. I agree with what Dr. Mike said. I don't see a problem with it, but I acknowledge that some people might not like that idea.
Totally. There's lots of discussion to be had there, clearly outside the scope of this webinar, about the nuances, especially how to present some things to others. You know, like more smart people in this world actually helps the stupider people in this world. It doesn't hurt them. And you know, like if you want equality to keep everyone stupid, I'm just going to cheat, flout the law, and get smarter than you, and, you know, revolt. You know what I'm saying? Trying to keep people stupid doesn't work in the long run. Probably a better argument to say, okay, let's let the super rich people get as smart as possible, but also put in some kind of mild taxation or some sort of like that, which we already have, by the way, to try to get this technology cheaper and cheaper, so that even the poorest folks can get some intelligence improvement, which would be fucking amazing. You know, maybe you're not going to be a fucking mind god, but you could have an IQ of a current great scientist today. Oh fuck, I'll take that. I'll take anything. Right?
Or even just like, okay, I might not be a mind god, but I won't have Alzheimer's disease. Like, great,
for sure.
we all win right there.
For sure. I will say that one promising thing about genetic engineering is the fact that we have tons of different countries, different governments. If it's banned in certain places, some places are going to start doing it, and once they get good at it, the people there are just going to be fucking better, and then people in all the other countries are going to be like, why the fuck don't I have that?
It's going to be an arms race.
Yeah. Right. It's like trying to keep capitalism under a lid. Like, you know, after Thailand like doubled its GDP in 10 years between 1990 and 2000, all the other countries around were like, why the fuck are we still socialist? They're just like, yeah, let's like do a little bit more market shit, because like I want that. So it's because you don't have to sell it; it sells itself. But anyway.
Yeah, totally.
All right, so
funny discussion.
Yeah.
You're muted, my friend.
Sorry, I muted myself.
There you go.
Then begin talking. Last question here from Peyton. I understand the stress increases while you're on a long cut, but I have personally felt slightly depressed. Have y'all ever experienced that? I am mentally healthy, don't worry. It's only slightly. I understand that it will go away once I get finished. Thank y'all. That's a better way of saying that. This webinar helps me get through this assignment overseas. Oh, I didn't know you were assigned overseas. Stay safe, depending on what kind of assignment it is. Don't die. Don't kill anyone unless you have to kill people, and then do so judiciously. Yeah, man, join the club, bro. Cutting fucking sucks, and yeah, you will be a little bit depressed. Now, make sure the rest of your life is doing good, and try to find other ways to be happy. Because, you know, sometimes some kind of mild depression can sneak up on you. You can think it's the cut, but it's really not. Make sure your life is going generally the direction you want. You're not in any sort of like toxic relationships. Your career is going in the right path, et cetera, et cetera. But honestly, man, you know, massing is fun times for a fucking reason. The best summary of the trade-offs of massing and cutting I've ever heard is like from Dennis James, a bodybuilder, and for some reason he had the ability, at least in this case, to put something so succinctly. Like why would you put something so simply if we could nuance blather about it for 2 hours? Here it goes. They're like, what do you think? They asked him, like, what's your deal with? Oh, there's somebody behind you.
Sounds good.
Fuck
Yeah.
off. Bye. Is that Mel? Oh,
Yeah.
Mel.
Morning Bears break.
Montana. Yikes. They're like, what do you think like is good at like what do you think about like massing and cutting? What's like kind of like your take on the two, like emotionally? Which one do you like best? He goes, cutting's great because you get to look better all the time, but you feel like shit. And that's the bad part. And massing's great because you get to eat whatever you want, but you look worse and worse the entire time. And I was like, there it is. There it is. So, because people always like want one to be categorically better, and it's like cutting is great because you get to look better and a lot gets done. You get to sort of like cutting is the ultimate delayed gratification. Yeah. Where during the cutting you sort of don't even look that great yet, but you feel kind of a little depressed, and then at the end of cut you start to build that momentum. Like, oh my god, this is awesome. Cut ends, you're lean, and then you can dope that leanness out for as long as you like. It'll give you more happiness while you get to eat tasty food, or you can really up the happiness by eating lots of tasty food, massing and losing the leanness. So on average, your happiness is just about the same, but higher because you're incrementally putting on muscle over that time or incrementally decreasing fat. So over the medium term, yeah, you will feel a little bit more sad when you're not eating the fucking shit you like. And also the brain doesn't have enough energy to be happy, for the love of God. Like brain defaults to like meh, kind of like bulldog mode. When you don't have it, when you're on cutting calories, your brain does the bulldog thing where it's like, it just sits there. And then like, that's not a very happy place to be. Although I think bulldogs might be happy. Who knows?
Can't tell. Yeah, it's normal for like neuroticism to go up during a cut. It's like you're starving, you're working really hard. It's completely fine to have like increases in like more negative thoughts and emotions. Don't let it get you down. It's temporary, just like most negative emotions are.
Yeah, like the first day of my cut, I walk out in the street and I'm like, I'm gonna fucking kill everyone. All right. Sean Meyer has edited and said that posted this before finding the needs analysis and phase potentiation lectures on RP Plus. So you can skip this question if you would like. Love the content. So we're going to skip your question, Sean. Great job, James, with those lectures. So
all right. Glad you enjoyed.
Yeah.
And actually, Sean, keep your eyes peeled. So the book that Jake, Chad, and I are working on, we're going to have a draft 0 in August, and then it's going to go to the authors, including Mike, for kind of content-related author edits, and then we'll go through the normal RP process. But that book will probably in the next year or two come out and really beat that question to death.
Super. All right. Next up is Aaron A. May. It looks like it would be almighty if I had to read it fast.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Hello, doctors. You may or may not recall that a while ago I asked you about your opinions for entry into the field of sports science. Thank you for your insights. Because of your advice, I signed up for anatomy and physiology and an exercise science course, which I'm taking right now. It uses prerequisites for my entry into a grad school. I'm very interested in the ETSU strength and conditioning online master's program because it's more affordable for an out-of-state resident. If you have any thoughts about this, I would love to hear them, specifically about the ETSU online master's program in strength and conditioning. James, thoughts? Careful.
I don't want to say too much on this. I would say there are other options that are potentially worth exploring.
Yeah, it's a good option. Maybe not the only option is what I'll add. And then since these are summer courses, I have to go in depth on some of my topics on my own, and I'm trying to learn as much as possible. So I have a few questions regarding lactate threshold, energy systems overlap, principle of orderly recruitment, and critical power. Sorry if my questions are messy. I'm trying to make sense of a lot of concepts at once. Well, James, this is kind of cool. We're like his like teaching assistants. This is really trippy. It's like having students on again. Oh fuck! God damn it! I got to start making finalized materials for Brad Schoenfeld's courses online.
Quit slacking off. God damn it.
For the principle of orderly recruitment, my textbook says that more fibers are activated with increasing force or duration of physical activity. An example they used is the end of a marathon where most of the type 1 and 2A fibers may be very fatigued. Type 2X can be stimulated to continue exercise. My understanding is that fatigue happens primarily because of glycogen depletion. These faster fibers are not very well equipped to deal with the massive level of cellular respiration. So wouldn't the race pace as a percentage of VO2 max need to decrease drastically to cope with the switch to faster fibers? It wouldn't need to decrease at all. Your faster fibers give out, and then it would need to decrease. So the faster fibers are used incrementally more and more and more. If you run a proper race, they never use too much to where they peter out, so your pace can be identical. If you sprint too fast in the middle, then you will absolutely peter out and you'll just be walking the rest of the time. Ideally, the way to do it is to keep the pace the same, and in visual distance of the finish line, speed up to basically a half sprint using all the fucking fibers in your body. and then collapsing at the finish line. James.
Yeah. Yeah. So the principle of orderly recruitment is kind of a hybrid of some other concepts that are a little bit more concrete. The first one being Henneman's size principle, which deals with how motor units and muscle fibers and the types of fibers start to change depending on the activity. And what it basically means is if you have kind of like very low force, low power activities, you use very small muscle fibers, and they're typically more type 1. And as the intensity of that activity increases, you start recruiting incrementally larger and larger fibers, and then move into some of the bigger, more fast twitch fibers as you go. So that's the first one. And then the second one is really more of kind of a fatigue issue, where when you have some muscle fibers that are kind of approaching their failure point for various reasons, whether it's biochemical or they're things like that, we start to increase the motor units that are available, even if they are not the best choice. But that is kind of, like Dr. Mike said, the last ditch effort, because once your type 1s are becoming largely tapped out and they have to actually start using some of the other ones like type 2s to contribute, that is basically you're on your muscles' deathbed, because once those kick in, it's a time bomb. You're not going to last very long, because they are not able to do that activity. They're going to produce a ton of lactate, ton of fatigue, and that race is going to be over. So those are kind of two separate ideas that they're kind of hybrid into one. I would go and read more about Henneman's size principle, and that will probably make a lot more sense to you. This one's kind of like a hybrid of a couple different principles.
Excellent answer, James. James, I'm going to let you take this next one. I'll read it, and then please answer it, and I might have some things to add in. My book says that critical power and lactate threshold are similar and related, but don't go into more detail. Can you explain why they are different concepts? They seem like the same thing to me. Critical power is apparently the maximum pace that can be maintained purely by the oxidative system, and theoretically can be maintained indefinitely. However, realistically, it can only be maintained for 30 minutes or so. Why can it be maintained for only 30 minutes?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the lactate threshold is essentially the point at which the lactate that you are producing in the muscles is no longer being able to be buffered at the same rate that it's being produced, and you will start accumulating lactate within the muscle and possibly into other areas of circulation. Critical power is kind of like kind of a proxy for like a VO2 max kind of level pace. It doesn't mean the same thing as hitting a VO2 max, because VO2 max is more of like a peak, but it's kind of like, what's the highest rate that you could theoretically sustain purely through oxidation, right? Those two are going to be really highly related, simply because like as you increase intensity, lactate production also just goes up hand in hand, but they do kind of diverge off at a point. So the lactate threshold is basically saying like, all right, as the intensity is going up, I can buffer my lactate, I can buffer my lactate, I can buffer my lactate. And then you hit a point where the intensity is high enough where it's like, I'm at equilibrium with my lactate. And if you keep going past that point, now I'm actually going to be accumulating lactate. And at that point, you're on a fatigue related time bomb. You will not be able to continue doing what you are currently doing. At some point, you either have to slow down or that event will end as a result of fatigue. Critical power, and this is not something that is, I think this is kind of like a little tinier term, but critical power basically be like the max race pace that you could push. The thing is, there is no such thing as, so there is no such thing as being able to purely sustain energy output by one energy system or another. They're all used at the same time. The thing with oxidation is it doesn't produce energy at a fast enough rate to be able to sustain exercise indefinitely. That's the problem. So whenever you start exercise, you're going to be kind of very phosphogenic initially, and then it's going to move into glycolytic. And then as exercise continues, it'll become increasingly aerobic if the intensity is relatively low. The problem with the oxidative system is that it doesn't even reach its peak rates of energy output until you're roughly 90 to 120 minutes into an exercise session. So you have been accumulating metabolic byproducts and fatigue that entire time. You might even be tipping over that lactate threshold at some point just because of the duration and the intensity of the activity. So it's kind of a fool's errand to think that you can sustain activity just purely through oxidation, because just to get to that point where you're at your peak output, you've already committed to quite a bit of fatigue, and you've probably already at least flirted with that lactate threshold time bomb at some point. So remember, all energy systems are operating at all times. The volume and intensity and the duration of the activity will shift their relative contributions around, but they do not work exclusively without each other.
Great answer, James. I just want to add that critical power, you define it as the maximum pace that can be maintained purely by the oxidative system. That's not correct. Critical power of the oxidative system, that would be correct. But critical power in general is just the amount of power that you have to put out in order to sustain an effort of X duration at X pace. Like 30 minutes at 10 miles an hour, your average power has to be this. And if your power falls below that, you're just not doing it anymore. You're not going to hit your pace. So it comes in handy on cycling, where if you're on a bicycle, you actually have a power meter and you know what power you're at. And that power, if you've done the calculations correctly, will get you where you need to go at whatever duration you have set out. So if you're going, I want to get this next mile marker in 30 minutes, that means my wattage can't fall below this critical power, right? And if it's falling below, like, I'm fucked, right? So that's really what critical power is. And as James explained, lactate threshold is when your lactate goes from stable to exponentially accumulating. And that also depends on a variety of things. There's not one lactate threshold. It really does depend on a variety of activities. And also a lot of times, like, you could have a lactate here, you could lactate here, and then the lactate threshold is when it finally shoots up like this. A lot of times, people say anything below lactate threshold is sustainable indefinitely. Bullshit, because eventually you sustain the same thing. The lactate goes towards the end. It's just how long it takes until the lactate threshold goes up is the real question. And then number 3, how can you use the concepts of either lactate threshold or critical power to improve duration of anaerobic glycolysis? Anaerobic glycolysis is an interesting one. How is this type of training structured? In other words, how does this relate to being able to do very high intensity activity for a longer period of time? The situations I can think of as applying to some sort of sports like maybe wrestling, shorter intense CrossFit workouts. Yeah, it's actually a very easy answer here, and James can clean up or correct me if I'm wrong. But essentially, various forms of interval training are excellent for doing this, because so what you really want is to be around the best way to get a better lactate threshold and thus improve your ability to do, actually improves your ability to aerobic glycolysis, not anaerobic glycolysis, is to make sure that you're sort of in that flirting with that zone close to the threshold, close to lactate threshold. So probably the best way to do this is to operate at a low baseline level or at no level at all and just sit there, and then get to, and then past the lactate threshold. Try to hang in as long as possible. When you get too fatigued to hang in, drop off and either stop doing the activity, like in CrossFit, sets of 10 in a squat, or like in endurance running, you just run slower for a while. And then once your lactate begins to clear and stabilize, then you bump into it again. It's that flirting with the zone that gives you a lot of time exposed to all of those lactate sort of inclinations, and thus your mechanisms for clearing and producing all elevate, and the adaptations go, and then eventually that entire bar of around your lactate threshold goes up and up and up over the months of training, and all of a sudden you're a fucking baller who can do a ton of aerobic glycolysis. Anaerobic glycolysis, how you improve that is actually very straightforward. You just, lactate threshold is here, you train up here all the time, train up here a bunch and then relax, train up here a bunch and then relax, because that's where the anaerobic glycolysis is happening. Right here in the close to the threshold, it's actually a lot of aerobic glycolysis because the glycolytic system doesn't outpace the oxidative much, so you can keep up. So lactate threshold training and stuff like that really is mostly pushing your aerobic abilities. Anaerobic glycolysis is just like you're literally just training that when you're doing sets of 10 on the squat. No joke. Like that's how that shit works.
I'm glad you said that, because I was going to segue into that. So a lot of people just assume that means like you have to do this like very high intensity type cardio training, and really, so those terms are kind of have been replaced over the last few decades. So kind of in the era that Mike and I were studying, really what you're talking about is developing what was traditionally been called strength endurance, which is basically your ability to tolerate high intensity exercise. And what we just call that now is much more simple. We just call it work capacity, right? Which means, can you tolerate voluminous and or high intensity exercise and have it not kill you, right? So that's the idea. And really, starting off with doing, like incrementally harder and harder, moderate intensity exercise. Weight training is a great example of that. It's high intensity compared to like walking or jogging per se, but something like weight training is a really good way of building up your tolerance to both particularly anaerobic exercise, but also aerobic exercise to some degree. And then having a combination of something like some weight training and then some kind of form of cardio training, whether it's aerobically based or more anaerobically based, is really how you get good at that kind of stuff. And if you're using a phase potentiated model, you would have a period where you have a few mesos or months where you're doing kind of more hypertrophy type lifting. We'll say like kind of in that like, sets of 10 type range. And then you build up that work capacity. So your muscles and connective tissues are tolerant to that exercise stimulus and you're not going to break down. And then later you would increase the intensity and get into whatever high intensity activities like CrossFit as you move into your sport specific training later on after you've developed that tolerance to training. So they go hand in hand. They don't have to be one or the other. It's one of those kind of like phase potentiated things where if you want high intensity endurance for those kind of things, you build it first with moderate intensity and kind of ramp up over time. Simple as that.
Excellent answer. Which brings me to my final point on this, hopefully. A huge pet peeve, and it has been for years, energy systems training. What the fuck does that mean? All trainings use your energy systems.
Yeah.
And which one, by the way? In which combination? Holy fuck. It's like saying like, oh, today we're going to be lifting. That's muscle training. Fuck off. What, like, yeah, hypertrophy training makes sense. It's an actual outcome, but like every training is muscle training. Use your muscles for every fucking training. Fuck.
Yeah. So like the energy systems training is a way of trying to, and Dr. Mike knows this, I'm not talking down to him at all, but like just to go on his point. So they use that term energy systems training and they make it sound complicated, right? Where the reality is it's like, it's not really energy systems training. You're really just working on the kinetics and kinematics of whatever training that you're doing. Like how long does an effort last? What's the average intensity of the effort? What's like a work to rest ratio of the sport or activity that you're doing? That's what you want to know. It's not like what percentage of the energy is being produced by the phosphagen system versus anaerobic versus like that. That's how they package it. But that's really not what you need to know. What you need to know is like, what is the athlete doing? How long do they do it for? How much recovery time do they have? When do they repeat? That kind of stuff.
Well, like metabolic training. Like,
yeah, it's
all metabolic, folks. It's all metabolic.
Was I not metabolic?
My metabolism is off. Shit. All right. Next up is John Balasiak. He says, hey, docs, number one, if scientists think the process of synthesizing new muscle isn't a quick process but can happen over months, I know there's still a lot of unknown about timelines, would say getting a night of low-quality sleep significantly reduce any muscle gain from that day's training stimulus. It might, because remember, stimulus and resultant growth are two different things, right? So like, if it takes a year to build a sculpture for a famous third world leader, okay, or a Greek leader, it takes a year to construct the sculpture, but you take one gunshot and quickly kill the messenger that's getting the drafts of the sculpture to the designers, you had an alteration that took a fraction of a second, and it canned a whole year of work from ever happening. So the stimulus that puts into motion the growth that occurs for weeks and weeks and weeks can actually be a very small, short of time frame. It can affect muscle growth way, way down the line. Now, to put that in perspective, I think you do have a good point there that you're implying one night of missed sleep is just not going to make a big difference in your overall muscle growth. And that would be the case even if muscle growth occurred on a daily timescale level or an hourly timescale level. After all, you have so many hours in the year. If 5 of them were of shitty sleep, when the normally 8 would have been of good sleep, it just really doesn't amount to much. So either way, it doesn't amount to much, but we got to be careful between the difference between stimulus and the realization of the process.
Yeah, I totally agree with Dr. Mike there. And there is something there, I only can support this with anecdote, but if you've ever had like a really fucking good training session where you're like, I know tomorrow I'm going to be jacked up, but for whatever reason, you don't get a very good night's sleep. Maybe you stayed up or you just couldn't fall asleep. You wake up the next day feeling not jacked up at all. And you're like, man, I thought for sure.
Sometimes I don't even get sore.
Yeah, exactly. And then all of a sudden, the next night you get a good night of sleep and then you get that like super delayed onset soreness and you're like, holy shit, there it is. There's definitely something there that's worth noting. Again, that's anecdote, but there's also some other cool stuff on the kind of motor learning side where we know that a lot of motor learning is kind of hit or miss depending on whether or not you get sleep. Now, the muscle is going to respond differently, but there is a nervous system component where if you're trying to learn motor skills and your sleep gets disrupted, a lot of what you were learning that day is definitely inhibited. You do not get the same carryover effect of motor learning in many cases when sleep is interrupted like that. So I'm not saying that the nervous system and the muscle operate in that same way, but it does kind of paint this picture that like, yeah, even missing an acute bout of sleep could have tangible effects on your training.
Brilliant. Number 2, for my rep sets on small muscle groups where set volume is getting higher, like 6+ working sets, would it make sense to break them into clusters of my rep sets? Okay, something like 8.
Sorry,
It's already
I
bi-reps.
got lost there.
Yeah,
I was like, wait, I thought,
maybe
is that what you were doing?
Maybe get rid of the first myo-rep and say, for sets on small muscle groups where the cell volume is getting high, would it make sense to break them into clusters of myo-rep sets? Oh no, clusters of myo-reps. So something like 8 sets of calves, maybe do 4 sets with 5 seconds rest between. Stop, take a proper longer rest, then repeat. Is there a better strategy?
Oh,
I think, I think it's whatever it gives you the highest stimulus to fatigue ratio. So if you've done some myo-reps just to save time, and then like after 4 or 5 myo-reps, you're like, I really need to just cool it for a sec because my systemic fatigue and even local fatigue is getting out of hand, and you rest an extra 30, 40 seconds, and then you hit another cluster, I think that's totally fine. So as needed to keep your stimulus to fatigue ratio high, and if that's something you think benefits you, I think that's totally good to go. You could even do smaller clusters of like 2 myo-rep sets, rest for a longer time, 2 myo-rep sets, rest for a longer time. Just make sure you're judging, how hard the contractions are, mind muscle connection, and your degree of pump that you get out of this, and also long-term gains. Like if you get gnarly fucking crazy forearm pumps, and just a ton of mind muscle connection, tons of tension perception, so on and so forth, tons of lactate accumulation, doing a straight myo-rep, and if you stop and restart it's not as good, then don't do that. But if you stop and restart and you get an even better result, then absolutely do that, because you don't want to just be doing junk volume towards the end of them. I just did a wrist curl junk volume and it looks a lot like something else, although it doesn't really, because sometimes people say like this is jerking off. I'm like, you move your dick front to back, what the fuck are you doing? Like, what is that?
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Mike here. The only thing I would say is you probably want, it's a slippery slope when you allow yourself to break protocol just because. So what I would say is you might want to play with your myo-rep protocol and try and implement it consistently, whether it's taking a slightly longer break or you say, okay, after 4 sets, I take a larger break than normal just to kind of get back into it. That's fine, but it gets a little wishy-washy when you start saying like, well, I'm doing myo-reps, but I'm only doing myo-reps when I feel like doing myo-reps, and now I'm doing something else. If you look at like metabolite training is a really good example of this, where let's say you're doing push-ups or something like deficit push-ups for high reps, and let's say you take 30 seconds of rest, and then your reps just go like within 3 sets, you're down to doing like sets of 5 at that point. And you're like, okay, I'm not really getting much going on here. But if I take, 50 to 60 seconds rest, you can at least have your reps stay elevated. You get good mind muscle, good pumps, good burning, and you can get, like 20, 15, 12, 10, 8, rather than like 20, 8, 5, 5, something like that. So I think finding the right protocol and just implementing it consistently is probably better than just, I just don't want you to get wishy-washy is really my point.
That's a great point. James, would you want to answer number 3 there as well? So number 3 is, let me pull it up. Would you consider myo-reps an intensity technique-based safe for metabolite muscles? Because I feel like that's very related to your last point.
Yeah, that to me, I am not someone who has used myo-reps, in my opinion, really successfully. I've dabbled and I've used them in different ways, and I've played around with it, and I've done it with my clients. And honestly, I haven't figured out a way to do it that doesn't really fit in kind of that metabolite meso style. That doesn't mean that I'm right or wrong. It's just from a practical standpoint, that seems to make the most sense in terms of its implementation. Other people do it a different way, but I think, my opinion, the SFR of doing that when you're kind of in you're more of like your standard like 6 to 10 kind of rep stuff just doesn't seem to make sense. Whereas like implementing it like on a meso 3 where you have a little metabolite dabble here or there seems to make a lot of sense, and it seems to be easy to implement.
Very good answer. Number 4, forearm training. The following exercises were notably absent from the hypertrophy guide: wrist extensions, reverse curls, hammer curls. Was this intentional? For example, I've never seen Mike do any forearm work other than wrist flexion. So the wrist extensors for me are so small. There's such a small muscle group. It's kind of like the foot extensors, like the tibialis anterior. I don't know anyone sane that trains the tibialis anterior. And I think that for various rowing and stuff like that, the wrist extensors, the wrist extensors get trained plenty. They get trained a ton on lateral raises of every kind, if you think about that. If you wanted to use them, great. I just don't think it's as likely that we'll publish those exercises as we will like tibialis anterior exercises. James, do you have anything to say on that?
I like some of those movements, but I'm not. It's like an SFR issue. Like I actually feel like I get a lot out of reverse curls. I get massive pumps. My forearms aren't necessarily limiting, and like it'll fuck me up the next day. Most people say like I get nothing out of reverse curls. They're completely useless exercise for me, right? It's just a difference in SFR across individuals. Hammer curls are one that I like to use a lot, but I've had plenty of clients who say, hey, those hammer curls are really fucking up my elbows. Can we do something else? And certainly we will. But I don't really have any other insight other than it mostly just kind of SFR at that point. Like they might work for you. And if you don't really care about like things like your wrist extensors, like then you don't have to train them.
Super, super, very good point. Why do you think seated calf raises are necessary? They were another notable absent exercise from the calf hypertrophy guide. I understood because I know both more or less view them as a waste of time, but the average reader might wonder why they aren't mentioned. They aren't mentioned because they don't train the gastrocnemius, which is the biggest, most aesthetically pleasing part of your calf. They train the soleus, which is actually more slower twitch. And the gastrocnemius and soleus are both trained in straight knee extension, whereas only the soleus is really trained in bent knee extension, or bent knee plantar flexion. So it's just a dog shit exercise with a poor SFR for muscle almost no one sees that doesn't even grow that well, that you could also hit with another exercise. Holy fuck, it's starting to add up. If you want to do them, it's totally cool. It's just nothing we're going to recommend to most people because it's just not what they're looking for.
You know, Mike, what I want my calves to look like? I want it to look like I have like a McDonald's hash brown sitting on top of a pancake. That's why I do my seated calf raises.
Exactly. I want the soleus to be bigger than the gastroc so people can laugh at me.
Exactly.
So number 6, last one from John Plisiak. He says, when adding sets to a given session with 2 to 3 exercises for a body part, let's say a session with rows, 5 to 10 lat pull, 10 to 20, is it best to preferentially add them to the first exercise earlier in the meso and more to the second, lighter, more isolation exercise later in the meso? How do you think about the choice each week? We already answered that question earlier. Yeah. And who the fuck asked that question? It was Sanyev, right? Yep, Yordan Sanyev. Yep. That Yordan Sanyev's number 1 part of his question. John, if you want to scroll back to that, that is going to give you the answer you'd like. So there you go. Basically, the short answer is SFR, best SFR for added sets added there. All right. Erez, sweet fucking name. Is there any way to increase my cardiovascular endurance / work capacity for hypertrophy workouts without fundamentally hurting growth? Yes. Because cardio exercise increase cortisol levels, to my knowledge. Also, they convert your fiber types, and you end up becoming more slow twitch, which means sweet work capacity, but less hypertrophy. I want to be able to do higher rep leg workouts, but right now I feel like my cardiovascular system is a limiting factor, not my target muscles. Thank you, and keep up the great work. So I have a couple of points. 1, improve your recovery. Get more sleep, eat better food, and it'll make you better able to execute high volume workouts with high work capacity and high reps. Second, lose fat. If you lose fat, you get better at all that shit. You'd be surprised as to how much body fat impedes it. When I'm leaner, I don't even have a work capacity limit. Like I could just keep going. When I'm fatter, you sort of peter out all of a sudden. And lastly, do workouts like those, and eventually you get better at them, and also you get hypertrophy from them. So it's like a very, very exact use of the specificity principle, James.
Yeah, really, really good answer. And that really is the bottom line. It's like, how do I increase my work capacity for hypertrophy training? You do hypertrophy training. Really, that's really boilable. And especially if you're trying to say it in such a way, like you phrased it, like, how do I do it in such a way that doesn't inhibit growth? Well, it's like, well, that really is the only option at that point, outside of the points like losing weight, like Dr. Mike already said. Because any training that's not hypertrophy training, as we said earlier in the webinar, is just an opportunity cost. It doesn't matter if it was cardio or, power training or jump training, whatever. Anything that you do at that point is an opportunity cost lost and will impede it to some degree. But it turns out just doing hypertrophy workouts is a great way to get conditioned for hypertrophy workouts. Go figure. Specificity.
Specificity. Go figure. Fuck off. Whatever.
That just made me think of, I got tagged, I think his name's Jace Jumps on Instagram, the jump guy from RP Plus. I think he's in his like final peaking phase for his like dunk thing. So he tagged me in something today. It looked pretty cool.
Very cool. All right, here we go. Time to screen share for the 3 YouTube questions. Folks, we got about 2 more webinars where we're going to go 3 in YouTube, and then we switch to 10 YouTube questions, upvoted, ranked by upvotes. And here we go.
Let's do it.
So what do we got here? Let's take a look at Mike's recommendations. We got a bunch of Thomas Sowell, no surprise. John Meadows, stuff about Islam. Oh, American Iron President Institute. That makes sense. And yeah, really winnowing it down. A whole lot less Greg Doucette. I think it realized I never click on his links, and it just stopped recommending it to me. Trippy. All right.
Just kept hearing you talk about it in listening.
Okay. Here we go. Dimana B. Great question. What is your opinion on chrononutrition? Is keeping larger, more carb-dense meals earlier in the day worth it in terms of optimizing body composition? Considering the calories and macros are checked off with protein evenly spread throughout the day, would it be worth avoiding eating closer to bedtime? My personal answer is that the research on this is so far not convincing enough for me to say absolutely yes, but I say it's curious, and I would keep my eyes on it. The good thing about eating less carbohydrates and probably fats in the evening is been pretty well demonstrated, I think, with potential small upsides. The bad thing about it is if you're on a cut, you have to eat a little bit more towards the end of the day in order to fall asleep properly. And sleep eats every fucking thing. So I think especially for massing, I would not eat as much towards the end of the day as I would in the beginning. And cutting, you might end up having to shift that a little bit. But for now, the research is just not there in terms of volume. And when it is there, I'll tell you this chrononutrition is going to be a very, very small effect. It could be a significant effect that's worth your time, but it's not going to be life and death. James?
Yeah, I've only looked at this a little bit. So one thing's confusing for me is it like a macro specific thing, or is it just calorie loading at certain times specific thing?
Both. It's like mostly keeping your carbs earlier in the day and not eating. It's so keeping your carbs earlier in the day and then also reducing calories at least in the meal before you go to sleep should be like a relatively low fat, higher protein, lower carb, and thus lower calorie meal.
Yeah. So there's some like really obvious situations where that falls apart, like somebody who needs more food to get sounder sleep, somebody who trains in the evening. Those are like really obvious answers, but keep your eyes peeled. It's one of those things where like we just don't have enough information to really say yes or no. So just I like to say table it for now. Don't throw it away. Just table it for now. Come back to it when there's more info.
Yeah. Great question from Farhan Biruzdilan. Read in Russian. That sounds almost like a really nasty swear word. All right. So how long does it take for strength mesos to lose their effectiveness? If someone has a lot of muscle mass from doing bodybuilding style training, doesn't that automatically mean he can do strength work for a longer period of time effectively than someone who really isn't as heavily muscled? Well, so if you're really only dedicated to pure strength and you're not using anabolics to increase your muscle mass in the background, I think that given some level of muscularity without a lot of familiarity with strength training, and given that it's pure strength training in the sense that it doesn't increase your muscle mass at all, I think you can go up to as long as a year, maybe a little longer in some cases, optimizing neural coordination and other structural factors in order to increase significantly your strength level. And then very small increases after that. And to answer your question of if someone has a lot of muscle mass from doing bodybuilding style training, and let's say assume he's very unfamiliar with strength training, doesn't that mean he can do strength work for a longer period of time effectively than someone someone who isn't very heavily muscled? Absolutely. And I'll say there's a confounding variable there where people who aren't heavily muscled, if they do strength training, they gain muscle from it because usually not heavily muscled means undertrained, right? But if you have a guy who's trained for a long time in strength and isn't very jacked versus a guy who is very jacked from training for hypertrophy for a long time but hasn't trained for strength at all, you take that second guy and he could train for years in only strength training and get better and better and better. Perfect example is Amit Sapir. Amit Sapir was an IFBB pro bodybuilder, and he trained his training focused to powerlifting, and he actually lost muscle the entire time that he was powerlifting, got fucking exponentially stronger, broke the squat world record a bunch of times because he was just getting so much better at the movements, so much stronger from the neural perspective. And because he had a fuck ton of muscle. Like anytime a bodybuilder is healthy and has no injuries and is genetically very strong, hasn't strength trained in a while and enters the realm of powerlifting, the only thing people say is like, if he doesn't get hurt, he's going to fuck shit up. He's just going to keep getting stronger forever. A lot of times people be bodybuilders, not trained for strength, and have these crazy gym numbers where, like, dude, if that guy fucking did a strength cycle, it would go insane. And as long as they don't get hurt, that's always true. Whereas if someone's like already kind of like a twig and they've been training for strength for years, they're doing tons of sets of 3 to 5, and they're like, hey, I'm going to do a peaking cycle and strength cycle and just going to get tons stronger. You're like, where the fuck is that strength going to come from, bro? You've been training for strength for years. At some point, you need to go back and put on some muscle.
Yeah, excellent answer. And then just to kind of go back to that first part a little bit, how long does it take for strength mesos to lose their effectiveness? The answer is the same as hypertrophy mesos or anything else, right? Essentially, it's a volume landmarks problem where your MEV and your MRV get too close together, and then you just can't train for strength anymore. It's the same. It's the exact same problem, just a slightly different context. So when you get to that point where the amount of training you need to get stronger exceeds what you can tolerate, that's when it stops being effective. And that doesn't mean that you can't strength train longitudinally. It just means you got to take a break from strength mesos and do something else for a little while.
Yep. Last question, and I see it's already ranking them, basically ranks them for us here based on popularity of upvotes. So this is really good.
Milo Wolf is killing it.
Milo Wolf's the fucking man.
Look at that, 33.
He gets paid good money to do that, goddammit.
People are going to be really pissed. They're going to be like, they always read Milo's timestamps. That shouldn't count.
Great question, Milo. So 5 points, we just read them and we're like, you got them all correct.
You'd be like, it's bullshit. They only answer 9 questions. One's just the timestamps.
Amazing. All right. Ben Fleming 1000, not to be confused with prior version, Ben Fleming 999, who was retired and summarily executed, and the future of Ben Fleming's 1001, who is going to be a revolution in Fleminghood.
What about Ben Fleming Prime? We don't
James,
talk about that.
my brain is going to explode. We're not here to talk about top secret research projects.
Exactly.
All right. In the lecture video on prioritizing muscle groups, and this is the one I did for YouTube recently, you spoke about working the prioritized muscle first in a session before anything else. How do you balance the isolation exercises with the compounds? For example, if I wanted to target hamstrings and quads, would it be better to start with RDLs and squats or hamstring curls and leg extensions, assuming we were only able to train 3 or 4 times a week, so no two a days, or do you just try it and see how it feels? Well, you have a question to answer before you pick that. You want to answer the question of, do you want more raw stimulus magnitude or do you want a higher stimulus to fatigue ratio? Raw stimulus magnitude, almost always you start with compounds because they just break shit more and make you more jacked, but at a price of high fatigue. If you're running into fatigue problems and you want a stimulus to fatigue ratio that's higher, sometimes it pays to start with isolations, pre-fatigue the muscle that's targeted, and then do the compounds after. Not always, but sometimes. So once you answer that question, then your answer there is obvious. But generally speaking, you want to put the most effective exercises, however you define it, first. So if stiff leg, I wouldn't like make this isolation and compound distinction. And James and I have been getting further and further away from that. We just really worry about raw stimulus magnitude and SFR. Like if an exercise is fucking good, it doesn't fucking matter if it's compound or isolation. It just fucking works. So if hypertrophy is your goal, then you just got to do what works, and whatever works best, you probably do best. So if you told us that like stiff-legged deadlifts don't do a whole lot for you, which we would do the skeptical James eyebrow of, are you really doing them correctly? But let's say you were right, and you said lying leg curls were just trashing you and they were awesome. What should you do first? Of course, fucking lying leg curls. We would never tell you in a million years that that's stupid. But generally speaking, it comes down to whether or not it's raw stimulus magnitude versus stimulus to fatigue ratio. James?
Yeah, and as you were saying that, I just had kind of a thought running through my mind. And I think that's the biggest difference between kind of bodybuilding and traditional sports, where traditional sports tend to favor the raw stimulus magnitude side of things, where you just need to get fucking strong, fast, powerful, and there's a pretty straightforward way to get there. Whereas bodybuilding is a little bit more nuanced and a little bit more flexibility, and the bigger priority then is SFR, right? How do I get the biggest stimulus with the least cost so that I can basically have the lowest number of sets to reach my MRV for any given activity? Like that's the idea there. And I think sometimes those two things get confused a lot because the traditional sports model is, okay, I want to be good at basketball. Well, how do you get good at basketball? Well, you make them fucking strong and powerful. Well, how do I do that? Well, you do the compound movements. Generally, you prioritize the compound movements over the isolation movements. And that's where a lot of, I think, that confusion lies. So as you were saying that thought was running through my mind. And I was like, yeah, that makes so much more sense because in strength sports, we say do the compounds just because it's got that raw stimulus, and it doesn't. The SFR is great, and if you can find a movement with a big raw stimulus and a high SFR, that's probably great for sports. But for bodybuilding, it's much more forgiving.
Boom. Those are good, James. James, if I could give out golden stamps to just being an awesome guy, you would never get one.
You set me up.
I got you. I set you up so good. I underhand pitched you.
I thought you were going to go like Willy Wonka. I thought you were going that route. I was thinking like he's going to do Golden Ticket Willy Wonka, like pervy Willy Wonka, or like Forrest Gump Willy Wonka.
That fact that distinction exists is one of the beautiful reasons to be alive.
I got a good one for you to work on. Harvey Wonkenstein.
My head. Hey, Hey, what, you want the golden ticket? You want to come back here and give you you want the chocolate? I've got the factory. I've got it all.
On that note, we should wrap this one up, folks.
Bye.
A couple of notes real quick before we go. We're going to, we made an announcement last week. We're just going to reiterate that real quick. For all of the RP Plus questions that have been answered up through today, Mike and I are still going to backlog those and answer all of those questions. But today was essentially the cutoff day, which at the time of the recording is June 7th. So all questions up to, July 7th will be answered. And then from that point on, we're going to switch to YouTube only. So, and we'll make more announcements as we go, but just be prepared. We're going to start using the YouTube system, so you can post your questions there. Or if you see questions that you think are interesting, please upvote them. And then we're going to take the top 10, excluding Milo, of course. Unless he has a real question.
Yeah, really. And we're not even going to, on principle, we won't answer his questions. Just
fuck him. All right, folks. We're out. Have a good week.
Peace.